I'm the reason he's still alive, and the reason someone wants him dead." The words didn't echo, but the silence that followed made them feel louder than any alarm in the building as Naomi Brooks stood at the foot of the hospital bed, her steady gaze fixed on Ethan Caldwell, a man whose name once filled headlines, now reduced to a still figure beneath sterile white sheets, machines humming softly around him as if whispering secrets no one else could hear. The faint glow of monitors painting his face in pale blue light, while beyond the glass walls executives in tailored suits argued in hushed urgency, their voices tight with confusion and fear because nothing about this made sense, not the sudden collapse, not the lack of clear diagnosis, and certainly not the woman standing calmly where she had no permission to be. Yet Naomi didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even blink as a nurse approached with hesitation, unsure whether to question her or trust her. Because there was something about the way Naomi stood, something grounded, something unshakable. Like she had already walked through this moment before, like she understood the stakes in a way no one else in that room possibly could. And for just a second, as the monitor skipped a beat before stabilizing again, her mind drifted backward, not to wealth or power or anything that filled this room, but to rain hitting cracked pavement, to a dim corner of a roadside diner where the lights flickered just enough to make everything feel uncertain, to the sound of coins clinking in her hand as she counted and recounted money that wasn't enough, her breath tight, her future smaller with every second until a shadow fell across the table and a quiet voice broke through the storm. "You look like you could use a break." And when she looked up, she didn't see a billionaire. She saw a man who didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations, who simply placed a folded bill on the table. A single $100 that to him was forgettable, but to her was oxygen, was a bridge, was the difference between falling and standing. And then he was gone, just like that. No name, no expectation, leaving behind something far heavier than money, leaving behind a choice. And now, years later, standing in a hospital that smelled of antiseptic and quiet panic, Naomi looked at the same man and knew that what brought him here wasn't chance, wasn't stress, wasn't some random twist of fate, because the patterns didn't match, the data didn't lie. And as she stepped closer, her fingers adjusting a setting on the machine with a confidence that drew sharp looks from the staff, the rhythm on the monitor shifted, steadier, stronger, a change. Subtle enough to escape panic, but clear enough to mean everything. And suddenly the room felt different, like something invisible had just been interrupted, like a plan had been quietly broken. "Ma'am, you can't be here." A security voice cut in from behind her, firm but uncertain, and Naomi finally turned, her expression calm, almost gentle, as if the chaos surrounding her simply didn't apply. "If I leave," she said softly, "he won't make it through the night." And that was when the room truly went still, not because of fear, but because something in her tone carried weight, carried truth, the kind that didn't need proof to be felt. And across the hallway, reflected faintly in the polished glass, a man in a dark suit paused mid-step, his jaw tightening as his eyes flicked toward the room, then down to his phone, where a message sat unanswered, waiting, and for the first time since she arrived. Naomi's gaze shifted away from Ethan and locked onto that reflection, sharp, knowing, as if she had just found the piece that didn't belong, the one thread that, once pulled, would unravel everything. "Then tell me why his oxygen levels dropped for exactly 9 seconds, and why no one here noticed." Naomi did not raise her voice, but the question cut clean through the tension in the room as the lead physician froze mid-step, eyes flicking toward the monitor as if seeing it for the first time, while the faint beeping continued its steady rhythm, calm on the surface. But Naomi knew better because patterns always told the truth, and this one had been interrupted, not randomly, not naturally, but deliberately. And as the nurse beside her adjusted her stance, uncertain whether to intervene or step back, Naomi moved slightly closer to the bed, her hand hovering just above the control panel, not touching, just observing, as if the machines themselves might speak if she listened long enough. "We ran full diagnostics," the physician replied, his tone defensive now, trying to reclaim control of a situation that was slipping. "There is no indication of interference." But Naomi's eyes did not leave the screen. "There would not be," she said quietly. "Not if the system was reset right." After And that was when the room shifted again, not with noise, but with awareness, the kind that made people stand a little straighter, breathe a little slower. Because suddenly this was no longer about a collapse. It was about intent. And intent meant someone inside these walls knew more than they were saying. And across the hall, the man in the dark suit had not moved. His reflection still faint in the glass, but his posture had changed. Shoulders slightly tighter, head angled just enough to listen without being seen. And Naomi noticed, not directly, but in the way her focus sharpened, like a lens locking into place, because she had learned a long time ago that danger rarely announced itself. It hid in stillness, in silence, in people who looked like they belonged exactly where they stood. "Ma'am, I am going to have to ask you to step away," security said again, firmer now, stepping closer. But Naomi turned just enough to meet his eyes, calm, unwavering. "If I step away," she repeated, "you will be following protocol, and he will be following a path someone already set for him." The words hung there, heavy, impossible to ignore, and for a second the guard hesitated, not because he believed her completely, but because something in her certainty made doubt feel dangerous. And in that hesitation Naomi reached forward, adjusting a single parameter, a minor calibration that looked insignificant to anyone not paying attention. But the effect was immediate. The rhythm steadied further, the subtle irregularity smoothing out like a ripple fading across water, and the nurse inhaled sharply. "How did you know to do that?" she asked before she could stop herself, and Naomi did not answer right away, her eyes drifting once more to Ethan's face, pale but no longer slipping. "Because I have seen this before," she said finally, her voice softer now, almost distant, as if she were speaking to a memory instead of the room. And in her mind the diner returned again, not just the rain or the money, but the look in his eyes when he handed it to her. Not pity, not obligation, but something rarer, something that said he saw her as someone worth helping without needing a reason. And that was why she stayed now, why she could not walk away, because whatever had started here was not finished. And as the physician stepped back, uncertainty replacing authority, Naomi straightened slowly, her gaze shifting once more to the glass, to the reflection that no one else seemed to notice. And this time her eyes did not just observe, they locked, sharp and certain, because she saw it clearly now, the brief flicker of panic, the almost invisible movement as the man in the suit turned slightly away, too quickly, too carefully. And in that single moment Naomi understood something that changed everything. The person who wanted Ethan gone was not hiding in the shadows. He was standing in plain sight, close enough to watch, close enough to wait, and close enough to try again. You are watching him too closely for someone who claims not to be involved. Naomi did not turn her head when she said it, but the words landed with precision, quiet yet impossible to ignore as the man in the dark suit froze for just a fraction of a second before forcing a measured step forward, his expression composed, almost curious, the kind of calm that had been practiced over years in boardrooms where power was negotiated in silence rather than raised voices. "I am one of his executives," he replied evenly, his tone controlled. "I have every reason to be concerned." But Naomi finally shifted her gaze fully toward him, and in that moment the distance between them felt smaller than the room itself, because she was not looking at him the way others did, not as authority, not as status, but as a pattern waiting to be understood. Concern does not make people stand outside glass walls watching monitors instead of asking questions inside the room, she said, her voice steady, almost gentle, yet every word pressed against the surface of something he was trying to keep contained. And for a brief second, the faint hum of the machine seemed louder, as if the room itself was listening. The physician glanced between them, uncertain. The nurse held her breath, and even the security guard shifted his weight without realizing it, because something about the exchange had moved beyond protocol into something far more fragile. And the man in the suit adjusted his cuff slightly, a small movement. But Naomi noticed, she always noticed. "You are making assumptions," he said, his voice tightening just enough to reveal the strain beneath the surface. And Naomi let a quiet breath pass through her lips, not dismissive, not confrontational, but certain. "No," she replied softly. "I am recognizing repetition." And as the words settled, she stepped away from the bed for the first time, not retreating, but repositioning, her eyes flicking briefly to the monitor, confirming the stability she had just restored, before returning to him. The system reset happened exactly 9 seconds after the drop, she continued. That means whoever did it knew precisely when to act, and when to disappear. And now the physician's expression changed, confusion giving way to realization. Because what she was describing was not guesswork, it was timing, precision, intent, and those things did not happen by accident. Our system logs would show any manual override. He interjected, trying to regain control, but Naomi shook her head slightly. Only if the override was external, she said. But if it was done from within, by someone with the right access, it would look like normal fluctuation. And the room fell silent again, not with shock this time, but with something heavier, the slow understanding that trust itself might be the vulnerability. And across that silence, the man's eyes met. Hers again, sharper now, calculating, as if measuring how much she knew, how far she could go. And Naomi did not look away, because she had already crossed the point of hesitation the moment she chose to stay. And in her mind the memory returned once more, not just the diner, not just the $100, but what came after, the choices she made, the nights she studied, the paths she built step by step until she understood systems, understood patterns, understood how things broke and how they could be held together. And that was why she stood here now, not by accident, not by luck, but because she had learned how to see what others missed. You should leave, the man said suddenly, his tone lower. Now, quieter, almost as if he were offering advice rather than issuing a warning. This is not your responsibility. And for the first time, something in Naomi's expression shifted, not fear, not doubt, but something deeper, something rooted in memory and choice. It became my responsibility the moment he helped me when he did not have to, she answered, her voice calm but unwavering. And then she added, almost as if speaking to herself as much as to him. And now I know someone here is waiting for him to fail again. And as the words settled, the monitor behind her gave a soft, steady rhythm, stronger now, clearer, a quiet reminder that whatever had been started was not over. And Naomi's eyes did not leave the man in the suit, because she understood something he had not expected. She was not guessing anymore. She was closing in. If you think this is over, then you are not paying attention. Naomi's voice was low, but it carried through the room with a clarity that made everyone pause. Even the machine seemed to hum a little softer, as if the moment demanded it. And the man in the suit did not respond immediately, his eyes narrowing just slightly, calculating, adjusting, as though he were rewriting his next move in real time. You are stepping into something far more complicated than you understand, he said at last, each word carefully measured. But Naomi did not react the way he expected. She did not hesitate, did not retreat. Instead, she took one slow step to the side, positioning herself where she could see both Ethan and the reflection in the glass at the same time. A quiet, deliberate choice that spoke louder than anything she could say. Complicated things still. Follow patterns, she replied, her tone calm, almost patient. And patterns always leave traces. And as she spoke, her eyes flicked briefly toward the monitor again, not checking, but confirming, like a musician listening for a note she already knew was there. The rhythm steady now, stronger than before, which meant whatever interference had been attempted had not fully succeeded, not yet. And that realization shifted something deeper in the room, because now this was no longer about what had happened. It was about what might happen next. Doctor, Naomi said without looking away from the glass. If the system resets again, how long before anyone notices? The physician hesitated, clearly unsettled by the question. We monitor continuously, he answered, but his voice lacked the certainty it held before, and Naomi gave a slight nod, acknowledging the answer without accepting it. Continuous monitoring only works if you are looking for the right thing, she said, and then she turned, fully, facing the room again, her presence no longer quiet, no longer just observant, but anchored, intentional. Right now you are looking for a cause, she continued, but you should be looking for a repeat. And the words landed heavily, shifting the focus from past to future, from explanation to prevention. And that was when the nurse glanced back at the machine, her eyes widening just slightly as she noticed a subtle fluctuation that had gone unseen before. Not dangerous, not yet, but present, a ripple beneath the surface. There, Naomi said softly, pointing not with urgency, but with certainty, and the physician stepped closer, his expression tightening as he saw it too. The pattern, faint but undeniable, repeating in intervals that were too precise to ignore. That is not random, he murmured, more to himself than anyone else, and Naomi shook her head. No, it is not, she confirmed. It is waiting. And across the room, the man in the suit shifted again, this time more noticeably, his composure cracking just enough for the tension beneath to show, because now the room was no longer blind. Now the system itself was being questioned, and that meant his margin for error was disappearing. You are making a scene out of coincidence, he said, trying once more to regain control. But the words felt thinner now, less certain, and Naomi met his gaze directly, her expression unwavering. Coincidence does not repeat on a timer, she replied, and for a brief second, something passed between them, not words, not gestures, but recognition. The understanding that this was no longer a quiet interference, it was a countdown, and Naomi turned back to the bed, her hand resting lightly near the controls, not touching, just ready, as if she were standing between two outcomes and refusing to let one of them happen. And as the seconds ticked forward, each one measured not by sound but by anticipation, she spoke again, softer this time, almost like a promise. He is not going to fail again. And in that moment, the room held its breath, not because of fear, but because everyone could feel it. Something was about to happen, something that would either confirm her warning or prove them all wrong. And Naomi did not look away, because she already knew which it would be now. Naomi whispered, her eyes fixed on the monitor. Watch the pattern, not the numbers. The room tightened instantly, every gaze snapping back to the screen as the soft, steady rhythm continued for 1 second, then 2, then 3, and for a brief moment it almost felt like she might be wrong, like the tension had built toward nothing. But Naomi did not move, did not blink, because she had already counted this before, already traced the invisible line that no one else could see. And then it happened, subtle, nearly invisible, a slight dip, a hesitation so brief it could be dismissed as normal fluctuation, except it was not when it arrived exactly where she said it would, and the nurse's breath caught. There it is, she murmured, more to herself than anyone else, and the physician leaned in closer, his composure slipping as realization settled in, because this was no longer theory, this was repetition, controlled, intentional. Adjust it now, Naomi said calmly, not commanding, but certain, and before anyone else could react, she reached forward again, her fingers moving with precise confidence, making a minor correction that immediately smoothed the irregularity before it could deepen. And just like that, the rhythm stabilized again, stronger, clearer, undeniable, and the silence that followed was no longer filled with doubt. It was filled with understanding. That cannot be a coincidence, the physician said under his breath, and Naomi straightened slowly, her gaze shifting once more toward the glass, toward the reflection that had not moved, but had changed, the stillness now tighter, more controlled, like someone holding their breath too long. It is not, she replied softly, and this time there was no challenge in her tone, only conclusion, because the pattern had spoken, and it had confirmed everything she already knew. It is being triggered, she added, her eyes never leaving the reflection, and across the room the man in the suit finally stepped inside, his presence no longer passive, his expression carefully composed, but the timing was too perfect, too aligned with what had just occurred. And Naomi noticed, of course she noticed, because this was no longer about what he said, it was about when he moved. You seem very confident for someone who does not work here, he said, his voice smooth, controlled, but there was an edge now, a faint tension that had not been there before, and Naomi turned to face him fully, her posture relaxed but grounded. Confidence comes from understanding, she answered, and I understand that this is not over. And the words hung between them, heavier now, sharper, because the room had shifted from questioning her to watching him. Even if no one said it out loud, even if no one wanted to believe it yet, the doubt had moved, and he felt it. Then explain it, he challenged, his tone tightening just enough to reveal the strain beneath, and Naomi did not hesitate. The system is not failing, she said clearly. It is being accessed in intervals, short enough to avoid detection, precise enough to create instability without triggering alarms. And the physician inhaled sharply, his mind racing through possibilities he had not considered before. But that would require internal authorization, he said, almost in disbelief. And Naomi gave a small nod. Exactly, she replied, and then her gaze locked onto the man again, unwavering. Which means whoever is doing this does not need to break in. And the room fell silent once more, not because they did not understand, but because they did, and understanding made everything heavier, more dangerous, and for the first time, the man's composure faltered just slightly. A flicker in his eyes, gone almost instantly, but not fast enough, not for Naomi. You should be careful, he said quietly, his voice lower now, almost a warning. You are making serious accusations, and Naomi's expression did not change, not even a fraction. No, she replied softly. I am describing what is happening. And then she stepped back toward the bed, her presence returning to its original position, steady, unmovable, like a line that could not be crossed. And it is going to happen again, she added, her voice calm but absolute, and this time when the room looked at the monitor, they were not waiting in doubt. They were waiting in fear, because now they knew this was not a one-time event. This was a cycle, and somewhere in that cycle, someone was watching, waiting, ready to try again, and Naomi was already ready for it. Then we stop waiting, and we force it to reveal itself. Naomi's voice was calm, but the shift in her tone changed the room instantly. No longer reactive, no longer defensive. Now there was intention, and the physician looked at her with a mix of hesitation and urgency. Force it? He repeated, unsure whether to question or follow, and Naomi gave a slight nod, her eyes already scanning the monitor. The timing, the rhythm. If it is running on intervals, then it is expecting us to do nothing, she said. It is expecting blindness. And the nurse stepped closer, drawn in despite herself. So what do we do? She asked quietly, and Naomi turned slightly, her presence steady, grounded. We interrupt the pattern, she replied. Not by reacting, but by anticipating. And as the words settled, she moved again, her fingers hovering over the controls, not rushing, not guessing, but aligning with something she had already mapped in her mind, because this was no longer about observation. This was about control, and behind her, the man in the suit remained still, but the stillness had changed, no longer composed. Now it carried tension, calculation, the kind that came when a plan started slipping beyond reach. Doctor, Naomi said without turning, when the next interval hits, do not wait for confirmation, adjust immediately. And the physician hesitated for only a second before nodding, the authority he held shifting quietly toward her without announcement. Because in this moment, knowledge outweighed title, and across the room the seconds began to stretch again, each one heavier than the last, not because of fear, but because of expectation, because now they knew what to look for, and more importantly, when to look for it. And Naomi stood beside the bed, her gaze fixed, her breathing even, her presence anchoring the space around her, and then it came again. The same subtle dip, the same nearly invisible hesitation. But this time it did not go unnoticed. Now, she said softly, and the physician moved instantly, adjusting the setting as she had instructed, cutting the fluctuation off before it could complete its cycle, and the effect was immediate. The rhythm held, steady, uninterrupted, stronger than before, and for a brief moment, the room did not react, because what had just happened was not dramatic. It was precise, controlled, undeniable. We just blocked it, the nurse whispered, her voice filled with quiet disbelief, and Naomi exhaled slowly, not relieved, but confirmed. Yes, she said. And now whoever is doing this knows we are not blind anymore. And that was when the shift truly happened, not in the machines, but in the man across the room, his posture tightening, his gaze flickering for just a fraction too long, and Naomi saw it. Of course she saw it, because this was the reaction she had been waiting for. Not panic, not exposure, but disruption, the kind that forced a mistake. And she turned fully toward him now, her eyes steady, unwavering. You felt that, didn't you? She asked quietly, not accusing, not loud, but precise, and for the first time, he did not respond immediately. And that silence said more than any denial could have, because silence meant recalculation, and recalculation meant she was right. "You are crossing a line," he said finally, his voice lower now, controlled but strained, and Naomi took a small step forward, closing the distance just enough to make the moment unavoidable. "No," she replied softly. "I am standing exactly where I need to be." And the room held still again. But this time the tension had direction, it had focus, it had weight, and Naomi's gaze did not leave his, because she understood something he had not expected. This was no longer about saving Ethan from what had already happened. This was about stopping what was about to happen next. And as the monitor continued its steady rhythm behind her, stronger now, more stable, Naomi knew the pattern had changed, not ended, but changed, and that meant one thing. Whoever was behind this would not stop. They would adapt, and she would be ready when they did. He is going to change the method. Naomi said it so quietly that for a second it almost sounded like a thought instead of a warning. But the effect was immediate as the physician looked up sharply, the nurse stiffened, and even the guard turned his head toward her, because the certainty in her voice had shifted again, no longer reacting to what was happening, but anticipating what had not yet happened, and that was far more dangerous. "What do you mean change?" the physician asked, his voice tighter now, the earlier confidence fully replaced by focus, and Naomi did not answer right away, her eyes returning to the monitor, studying not the numbers but the absence of disruption, the unnatural stability that followed a blocked pattern, because in her experience, when something failed, it did not disappear, it adapted. "We interrupted the interval," she said slowly, "which means the system he relied on is no longer reliable." And as she spoke, her gaze shifted again, locking onto the man in the suit, who now stood closer than before, no longer hiding behind glass, no longer just observing, his presence deliberate, controlled, but the stillness around him had changed. It carried tension now, like a string, pulled just a little too tight. "So if he cannot use the same timing," Naomi continued, her voice calm but precise, "he will try something less predictable." And the nurse swallowed, glancing back at the monitor. "You mean random?" she asked, and Naomi shook her head slightly. "Not random," she corrected, "adjusted." And that single word seemed to land heavier than anything else, because adjusted meant intentional. It meant learning. It meant whoever was behind this was not just acting, but watching, reacting, evolving. And that realization moved through the room like a quiet current. "Then how do we stop something we cannot predict?" the physician asked, and Naomi finally stepped fully to the side of the bed again, her posture steady, grounded, her presence now less like a visitor and more like a barrier between what was and what might be. "We do not wait for it," she said. "We make it reveal itself again." And before anyone could question her, she reached toward the control panel, not making a correction this time, but introducing a slight variation, a controlled adjustment that shifted the baseline just enough to disrupt any external rhythm trying to latch onto it. Subtle, almost invisible, but deliberate, and the physician's eyes widened slightly. "You are changing the baseline?" he asked, and Naomi gave a small nod. "Yes," she replied, "because if he is watching for the same pattern, this will force him to react." And across the room, the man in the suit went completely still, not moving, not speaking, but something in his expression tightened, just enough, just long enough for Naomi to see it. And that was all she needed, because reaction meant presence, and presence meant confirmation. "There," she said softly, not looking at him directly, but knowing he would hear it anyway. And the nurse glanced back at the monitor again, her breath catching as a new fluctuation appeared. Different this time, not following the previous interval, not predictable, but real, undeniable. "It changed," she whispered, and Naomi nodded slowly, her eyes narrowing just slightly. "Yes," she said, "because now he is adjusting." And the room seemed to hold its breath again. But this time the tension was sharper, more focused, because now they were no longer chasing a pattern. They were confronting a presence, something active, something aware, and Naomi straightened, turning fully toward the man in the suit, her gaze unwavering. "You should not have done that," she said quietly, and for the first time, he did not respond with calm, did not deflect, did not redirect. Instead, there was a flicker, brief but unmistakable, of something closer to urgency, And that was when Naomi understood the final piece. Not just that he was involved, but that he was still trying, still pushing, still looking for a way through. And she took one small step forward, her voice steady, grounded, final. Because now I know you are still watching the system. And the silence that followed was no longer uncertain, it was defined, because in that moment, the line between suspicion and truth had disappeared. And Naomi was no longer searching. She was closing in. He is not just watching. He is testing how far he can push before we notice. Naomi's voice carried a new weight now, quieter but sharper, as if every word had been stripped down to only what mattered. And the room responded instantly, not with movement, but with attention, because something had shifted again, something deeper than pattern recognition, deeper than reaction. This was strategy, and the physician stepped closer to the monitor, his eyes no longer scanning passively, but tracking, analyzing. The fluctuation is no longer following a sequence, he said slowly, almost thinking out loud. It is irregular now. And Naomi gave a small nod, her gaze steady. Yes, she said, because he is trying to find a new entry point. And the nurse's hands tightened slightly at her sides, her voice barely above a whisper. Then we cannot predict the next one. And Naomi turned just enough to meet her eyes, calm, grounded. We do not need to predict it, she replied. We need to limit it. And before anyone could question her, she moved again, this time not adjusting. A single setting, but scanning across multiple parameters, her fingers hovering as if mapping invisible connections, because she understood something. The others were only beginning to realize this was not about one control point. It was about access, and access could be narrowed, restricted, contained. Doctor, she said without looking away from the panel, what systems are currently linked to this monitor? And the physician hesitated for a brief second, surprised by the question. Standard integration, he answered. Oxygen control, heart rhythm support, internal diagnostics. And Naomi's eyes sharpened. And remote access, she asked. And the silence that followed was immediate, heavy, because that was the question no one had asked yet. And the physician exhaled slowly. Only authorized personnel through secure channels, he said. But his voice no longer carried certainty. And Naomi nodded once, almost to herself. Then that is where he is, she said quietly. And across the room, the man in the suit shifted again, this time stepping slightly to the side, as if repositioning without drawing attention. But Naomi noticed, of course she noticed, because now every movement mattered, every second counted. We need to isolate this system, she continued, her tone firm now, not urgent, but decisive. Cut all non-essential access, reduce it to local control only. And the physician blinked, the request hitting him with full weight. That would override remote monitoring, he said, and Naomi met his gaze directly, unwavering. Yes, she replied, and it will also remove his ability to interfere. And for a moment, the room held still again, not with hesitation, but with decision, because this was no longer theoretical, this was action. And the physician turned toward the console, his movements deliberate now, focused, as he began initiating the isolation protocol. And as he did, the nurse stepped closer to Naomi, her voice low. If we cut him off, will he stop? She asked, and Naomi's eyes returned to the monitor, watching, waiting. No, she said softly. He will try something else. And just as the physician completed the sequence, the monitor flickered, not dramatically, not alarmingly, but enough to confirm what Naomi already knew, enough to prove that the connection had been active until this very second. And the physician froze, his breath catching as he stared at the screen. That should not have happened, he murmured, and Naomi stepped back slightly, her gaze lifting once more to the glass, to the man whose stillness had finally broken, his composure tightening, his jaw set just a little too firm, because now he felt it, the loss of control, the closing of access, the barrier he could no longer bypass. And Naomi took one slow step toward him, her voice calm, steady, final. You just lost your window, she said, and for the first time, the silence that followed was not filled with uncertainty. It was filled with truth, because now the room understood, not just that something had been happening, but that someone had been doing it, and that someone was standing right there, close enough to hear every word, close enough to feel the shift, and Naomi did not look away, because this was no longer about finding the pattern. This was about ending it. Cutting access did not stop him. It cornered him. Naomi's voice was steady, but there was a new edge beneath it now, something sharper, something that told the room this was not the end of anything, only a shift. And the physician slowly turned from the console, his face pale with realization. If he cannot access remotely anymore, he began. But Naomi finished the thought without hesitation. Then he will need to be closer, she said, her eyes already locked on the man in the suit, who now stood just inside the room, no longer behind glass, no longer separated by distance or reflection. And for the first time, the space between them felt charged, not with noise, but with recognition, because what had been hidden was now exposed in behavior, in timing, in presence. "You are making a serious mistake," the man said, his tone controlled, but the strain beneath it was no longer subtle, and Naomi took one slow step forward, not aggressive, not confrontational, but intentional. "No," she replied softly. The mistake was thinking no one would notice the pattern. And behind her, the monitor continued its steady rhythm, stronger now, clearer, almost defiant, as if it too refused to follow the path it had been pushed toward, and the nurse glanced between them, her breath shallow. "Doctor, should we call security?" she whispered, and the physician hesitated, caught between protocol and instinct, because this was no longer a technical issue. It was something else entirely, something that did not fit neatly into procedure, and Naomi did not look back, did not need to. "He is not going to run," she said calmly. "Not yet." And the certainty in her voice made the room pause again, because it meant she understood. Not just what had happened, but what would happen next. And the man's jaw tightened slightly, the smallest shift, but enough for Naomi to see the confirmation she had been building toward. "You keep saying that like you know me," he replied, his voice lower now, more controlled. But there was something else there too, something closer to urgency, and Naomi's expression did not change, not even slightly. "I know the system you relied on," she said, "and I know how you reacted when it stopped working." And for a second, the silence stretched, not empty, but full of everything that had been unsaid, everything that was now understood without needing to be spoken. And then the physician stepped forward, his voice firmer now. "Sir, I am going to have to ask you to step back until we resolve this," he said. But the man did not move immediately, his eyes still locked on Naomi, measuring, calculating, as if searching for something he could still control, something he could still turn in his favor. And Naomi held that gaze without hesitation, because she had already crossed the point where fear could change anything. "You adjusted faster than I expected," he said quietly, almost as if admitting it to himself. And Naomi gave a slight nod, acknowledging the truth in the statement without giving him anything more. "Because I was not guessing," she replied. "I was waiting." And that was when something shifted again, not in the machines, not in the room, but in him. A flicker of something closer to realization, the understanding that whatever plan he had set in motion was no longer moving in the direction he intended. And for the first time, he stepped back, just one step. But it was enough to break the tension that had held him in place, enough to show that control was slipping. And Naomi watched him carefully, not relaxing, not easing, because she knew better. She knew that stepping back did not mean stopping. It meant recalculating. And as the silence settled again, she turned slightly toward the physician, her voice calm but precise. "Keep the system isolated," she said, "and do not restore any external access, no matter who asks." And the physician nodded without hesitation this time, the uncertainty gone, replaced by clarity, because now he understood what was at stake. And Naomi's gaze returned once more to the man, steady, unyielding. "You tried to make it look like failure," she said quietly. "But failure does not repeat like that." And the words landed with finality, not as an accusation, but as truth. And for a moment, no one spoke, because there was nothing left to question, only what came next. And Naomi did not look away, because she knew this was not over, not yet. But now the balance had changed, and for the first time since she walked into the room, she was no longer the only one who saw it. "You did not expect him to survive this long, did you?" Naomi's voice broke the silence with quiet precision, not loud, not forceful, but sharp enough to stop every movement in the room as the man in the suit held his position just a few feet away, his composure still intact on the surface, but now it carried weight, the kind that came from being seen too clearly. And for a moment he did not answer, his eyes flicking briefly toward the monitor behind her, where the steady rhythm continued, stronger than before, unbroken, undeniable, and that single glance told Naomi everything she needed to know. That was not supposed to stabilize, she added softly. And this time the physician turned fully toward the man, the doubt that once surrounded Naomi now gone, replaced by something far more focused, something closer to alignment. Sir, I need you to step out of the room, he said firmly, but the man did not move right away, his gaze returning to Naomi, measuring, calculating, searching for something he could still control. You are drawing conclusions without evidence, he replied, his tone controlled. But there was strain now, subtle, but present, and Naomi took another step forward, closing the distance just enough to make the moment unavoidable. No, she said calmly. I am following your reactions. And the words landed differently this time, because now everyone in the room had seen it too. The timing, the shifts, the way his attention moved when the system changed, and the nurse glanced between them, her voice barely above a whisper. He knew, she said, not as a question, but as realization, and the physician's jaw tightened slightly as he turned back toward the man. Sir, please step back, he repeated, but again there was that pause, that hesitation, just long enough to confirm what Naomi had already understood, and finally, slowly, the man exhaled, a controlled breath that carried something heavier beneath it. Not panic, not fear, but acknowledgement. You are persistent, he said quietly. And Naomi did not look away. And you are predictable, she replied, and for the first time, the faintest trace of something resembling frustration crossed his expression, gone almost instantly, but not fast enough, not for her, and the room felt smaller now, tighter, as if the air itself had shifted. You think isolating the system ends this, he said, his voice lower now, more direct. But systems are not the only way to influence outcomes. And the words hung there, subtle, but loaded, and the nurse's breath caught, the implication settling in before anyone could speak it aloud. And Naomi's eyes narrowed just slightly, not in fear, but in focus, because she understood what he was doing now, shifting the narrative, redirecting the threat, trying to regain control through suggestion instead of action. You already tried the system, she said calmly, and it failed. And then she added, her voice steady, grounded, which means you are out of time. And that was when the silence broke, not with sound, but with movement, as the physician stepped forward more decisively, signaling to the guard, who now moved without hesitation, closing the distance between them, not aggressively, but with purpose, because the uncertainty that once held him back was gone, replaced by clarity, and the man in the suit finally stepped back again, this time not as a calculation, but as a response, a shift that confirmed everything without needing to say it. And Naomi watched closely, not relaxing, not easing, because she knew this was not the end, not yet, and as the monitor continued its steady rhythm behind her, she spoke one last time, her voice quiet but final. You did not just miscalculate the system, she said. You miscalculated who would notice, and the words settled into the room like a conclusion, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. And for the first time since this began, the balance had fully shifted, not just in the machines, not just in the room, but in the truth itself, because now it was no longer hidden. It was seen. You should stop now, because the next move will not be subtle. Naomi's voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it carried a weight that made the room hold still again, not out of fear, but out of understanding, because something had shifted beyond exposure, beyond suspicion, into something final, something irreversible, and the man in the suit paused mid-step, his gaze returning to her with a sharper focus, no longer masking the tension beneath. You are assuming there is a next move, he replied, his tone controlled, but thinner now, stretched by the pressure, closing in around him. And Naomi tilted her head slightly, her eyes steady, unwavering. You already said it yourself, she answered softly. Systems are not the only way to influence outcomes. And the words echoed back at him, not as accusation, but as reflection, and for a moment, the silence between them tightened, not empty, but full of everything now understood without needing to be spoken. And behind her, the monitor continued its steady rhythm, the sound now almost grounding, a quiet reminder that whatever had been set in motion had been interrupted, not completed, and that made all the difference. Doctor, Naomi said without looking away. How long before he regains full consciousness if this stability holds? And the physician glanced at the screen, then back at her. His voice measured, but more certain now. If nothing interferes again, a few hours, maybe less. And Naomi nodded once, absorbing that, calculating it. And then her gaze shifted back to the man, sharper now, more precise. That is your window, she said, not loudly, but clearly enough for everyone to hear, and the implications settled immediately. Heavy, undeniable, and the nurse's breath caught as she looked between them. Because now it was no longer about what had already happened, it was about what someone might still try to do. And the guard stepped slightly closer, his stance firmer now, no longer uncertain, because the room had moved past doubt, past hesitation, into action. You are escalating this beyond reason, the man said, but his voice no longer carried the same control. There was something else beneath it now, something closer to urgency, something that revealed the pressure he was trying to contain. And Naomi did not react to the words, not directly. Instead, she stepped slightly to the side, placing herself between him and the bed without making it obvious, a quiet shift, but deliberate, protective. And then she spoke again, softer this time, but more direct. You do not have another clean attempt, she said, and you know it. And for the first time, he did not respond immediately, his silence stretching just long enough to confirm the truth in her statement. Because clean attempts relied on control, and control had been taken away, piece by piece, until all that remained was exposure. And exposure left no room for precision, and that was what he had lost. You think this ends here, he said finally, his voice lower, almost reflective, but there was no confidence left in it, only calculation, and Naomi's expression remained steady, grounded. No, she replied calmly. This ends when he wakes up. And the simplicity of that statement shifted the room again, because it reframed everything, not as a conflict between two people, but as a race against time, and time was no longer on his side. And the physician moved closer to the monitor, his focus sharpened, his earlier hesitation gone, replaced by intent. Vitals are holding, he said, almost to himself, and Naomi allowed herself a single breath, slow, controlled, not relief, but confirmation. And then she looked back at the man one last time, her gaze unwavering, final. You planned for silence, she said quietly, but you forgot that patterns speak. And the words settled into the space between them like a conclusion that could not be undone. And for a moment, no one moved. Because the truth no longer needed to be chased, it had already arrived. And Naomi stood her ground, not as someone who had discovered it, but as someone who had made sure it could not be ignored. He is waking up. The nurse's voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the room with a clarity that shifted everything as all eyes turned instantly toward the bed, where Ethan Caldwell's fingers moved just slightly against the sheet. A small motion, almost unnoticeable, but enough to change the direction of every thought in the room. And the monitor responded with a subtle rise in activity, the rhythm no longer just stable, but alive. And Naomi's gaze snapped back to him, not with surprise, but with focus, because this was the moment everything had been building toward. Stay with me, the physician said quickly, stepping closer, his tone controlled but urgent as he checked the readings. And Naomi did not move from her position, her presence still anchored between the bed and the man in the suit, because she understood something no one else had fully said out loud yet. This was not just recovery. This was exposure, and the timing of it mattered more than anything. Mr. Caldwell, the physician continued, his voice steady now. If you can hear me, try to open your eyes. And for a second, nothing happened, the silence stretching just long enough to make the room hold its breath again. But then slowly, almost imperceptibly, Ethan's eyelids shifted, a faint movement that sent a ripple through everyone watching. And Naomi felt it. Not relief, not yet, but confirmation. because this meant the window had closed. The one the man in the suit had been waiting for, and across the room, his posture changed again, not dramatically, but enough to reveal the loss of control. He could no longer hide. "You should step back," the guard said firmly now, moving closer to him. But Naomi did not look away from Ethan, because this moment mattered more than anything happening behind her. "Mr. Caldwell," the physician repeated, "can you hear me?" And this time, Ethan's brow tightened slightly, his expression shifting as if something distant was trying to come into focus, and Naomi took a slow breath, stepping just a fraction closer to the bed, her voice softer now, steady, grounding. "You are safe," she said, not loud, not dramatic, but clear enough to reach him. And for a second, his breathing changed, not faster, not unstable, but aware, as if something in her voice had reached through whatever distance he was crossing. And the nurse glanced at the monitor again, her voice trembling slightly with realization. "He is responding," she said, and the physician nodded, his focus sharpening even further. "Good. Keep talking to him," he instructed, and Naomi did not hesitate, because she understood something the others did not. This was not just about waking him. It was about anchoring him, keeping him here, keeping him present. "You are in the hospital," she continued gently. "You are stable, and you are not alone." And behind her, the tension shifted again, the guard now standing firmly between the man in the suit and the rest of the room, his presence no longer hesitant, no longer uncertain, and the man did not resist, did not argue, but his silence carried something heavier now, something closer to realization, because the moment he had been waiting for had passed, and there was nothing left to control. And then, slowly, Ethan's eyes opened, not fully, not clearly, but enough for the room to exhale all at once, enough for the silence to break into something real, something undeniable, and his gaze moved slightly, unfocused at first, then settling, not on the physician, not on the nurse, but on Naomi, as if something in her presence was familiar even through the fog, and she held that gaze without hesitation, her expression calm, steady, grounded, and for a brief second, something passed between them, not recognition, not yet, but connection, and that was enough, because it meant he was here, he was present, and behind her, the man in the suit finally looked away, his composure breaking just enough to show what had been hidden all along, because now the truth was no longer something Naomi had to prove, it was something Ethan could see for himself. "Do you remember what happened?" The physician's voice was steady, but the question seemed to stretch across the room as Ethan's gaze struggled to focus, his eyes still adjusting to the light, to the shapes, to the faces that surrounded him. And for a moment he said nothing, his breathing slow but aware, his expression caught somewhere between confusion and recognition, and Naomi did not move, did not speak. She simply held her place beside him, her presence calm, grounded, giving him space to find his way back, and then, slowly, his eyes shifted again, settling on her, more clearly this time, as if something about her cut through the noise in a way nothing else could. "You," he whispered, his voice rough, barely formed, but enough to stop the room again, and Naomi felt it, not as surprise, but as something deeper, something that had been waiting. "You are safe," she said gently, her tone steady, the same words she had spoken moments before, but now they carried a different weight, because he was here to hear them, to understand them, and his brow tightened slightly as if trying to reach for something just beyond his grasp, a memory not fully formed, but close. "I know that voice," he said faintly, and behind them, the nurse glanced at the physician, her expression shifting from tension to quiet disbelief, because this was not just recovery, this was connection, and Naomi held his gaze, unwavering, her expression soft but certain. "You helped me once," she said, not explaining, not rushing, just placing the truth where he could reach it. And for a second, nothing happened, the silence stretching, filled with the quiet hum of machines and the weight of everything that had unfolded. But then something changed, a flicker in his eyes, a subtle shift, like a door opening just enough to let the light through. "The diner," he murmured, barely audible. And Naomi gave the smallest nod, confirming without overwhelming. And that was when the realization settled, not all at once, not completely, but enough for him to understand that this moment was not random, not disconnected, but part of something larger, something that had come full circle, and behind her, the guard tightened his stance slightly as the man in the suit shifted again, his composure now thinner, more fragile, because this was the moment he had not planned for, the moment where silence no longer protected him, where the truth did not need to be explained, only seen. And Ethan's gaze moved past Naomi then, slower now, more deliberate, taking in the room, the faces, the tension, and finally settling on the man standing just beyond her, and something in his expression sharpened, not fully aware, not fully certain, but enough to recognize that something did not belong. Why is he here? Ethan asked, his voice still weak, but clearer now, and the question landed heavier than anything Naomi could have said, because it came from him, from the one person who had been meant to remain silent, and the room held still again, not out of uncertainty, but because this was the shift, the final turning point, and Naomi stepped slightly to the side, not blocking, not shielding, but allowing the moment to unfold. That is what we are about to find out, she said quietly, her voice calm, but firm, and the physician glanced toward the guard, giving a subtle nod, and this time there was no hesitation as the guard stepped forward, his presence now decisive, and the man in the suit did not resist, did not argue, but his silence carried something heavier now, something closer to inevitability, because the moment had passed, the one where he held control, and now everything was moving without him. And Naomi turned back to Ethan, her expression steady, grounded, and he looked at her again, this time with more clarity, more awareness, and something else beneath it, something that had not been there before, something closer to understanding. You stayed, he said quietly, and Naomi allowed herself a small breath, not relief, not fully, but something close. You once gave me a chance, she replied, her voice soft but unwavering. This is me giving it back. And the words settled into the space between them like a quiet resolution, not dramatic, not loud, but complete. And as the monitor continued its steady rhythm, stronger than ever, the room no longer felt uncertain, no longer felt divided, because the truth had already taken its place. And for the first time since it began, nothing needed to be hidden anymore.